Hello and welcome to Chess with Simon. I'm Simon. Today we're going to look at a game by Ray Keene against Gert Ligterink in 1981, Lloyds Bank Masters, Nimzo Indian Defence. It's a fascinating tactical game, and it's also important to the theory of the Nimzo Indian. So let's take a look. d4 from white, knight f6, c4. So e6 is signalling black's intention to go to a Nimzo. Knight c3, so white allows it. White can play knight f3 here, Queen's Indian, or g3, Catalan probably, but white allows the Nimzo Indian. Black can still play d5 here, Queen's Gambit declined, or c5, Benoni, but black goes for it, bishop b4. Now, the point of the Nimzo is essentially to stop white playing e4, so white can't play e4 here because black takes it because the knight on c3 is pinned. So there's various things white can do. White can play f3 and try to force e4, although then black plays d5 to again try to stop it. Well, black can play c5, but black can also play d5 against f3. Queen c2. Queen c2's got a different idea in mind. So the basic deal for black is in the short term preventing e4, but further in the future black is prepared to give up the bishop for the knight to double white's pawns on the c-file and perhaps fix them. So if white plays queen c2, then white is trying to stop the doubling. Another idea is bishop d2, which basically does the same thing. It stops the doubling. Anyway, Ray didn't do that. Ray played pawn to e3. So if you can't play e4, e3 is kind of second best. c5 from black, undermining the white centre. White develops a bishop to d3, and then black plays knight to c6. So that pawn on d4 is attacked twice, so white's got to do something about that because it's defended once. You can play knight e2 here, but white's got a different idea in mind. White plays knight f3. And here at this point black takes on c3, so black is prepared to give up the bishop pair in exchange for doubling white's pawns on the c-file. And actually here black is doing it without waiting for white to play a3. So in some lines white plays a3 and black takes. So in those lines black has an extra tempo. But in this case black's just doing it without provocation. d6 from black. e4 is pretty much the main move in this position, and then black plays e5. So some people call this the blockade system. The basic idea is that black is going to blockade those pawns, close the centre, and then hopefully gang up on the c4 pawn with moves like knight a5 and bishop a6. I mean, hopefully winning it, but at least tying the white pieces down to defending it. That's the basic concept. h3, h6. So Ray has this idea on move 9 of playing h3. So the normal move here is pawn to d5. But Ray has seen an earlier move, Portish against Tony Miles, which went h3, and then Miles went queen a5. Portish went bishop d2, bishop d7. So this is the other game, castles, and essentially white manoeuvred the knight away. The reason white can do this is because if black takes on d4, when white takes back with the c-pawn, that discovers an attack on the queen. And actually black's queen ended up getting kind of stuck over on the queen side. I'm not going to go through the whole game at this moment. It's an interesting game, but essentially white developed control of the centre and pretty much boxed the black queen in on the queen side. I mean, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just flick through it, just in an impressionistic way, just to get a sense for what happened. So here white's certainly checkmating 1 on g7. Got to stop that. But now e6 is weak. You know, there's just weaknesses around the black king. Nice square for the black knight. Again, threat of checkmating 1, so the pawns in front of the king keep on moving, just creating those weaknesses. It's a really nice game by white. And now, you know, the queen is really struggling to get out. It's really boxed in. At this point, white's got an overwhelming position and black resigns. So this was the game that Keene really liked. But instead of playing queen a5, on this occasion, black plays h6, which is a more common move. As usual, Tony Miles was being creative and different, which is wonderful. That's what we love about him. One of the things we love about him. Queen c7. Okay, now Ray talks about... Okay, queen c7 is a good square for the queen for black because it's defending e5 and it allows black to connect the rooks. Keene makes the choice to take on c5, and he says this is a difficult choice because basically those doubled pawns on the c file now look pretty sick. So, and not kind of good sick, I mean unwell sick. Because basically, not as in sick one. In fact, when you say sick one, that actually means bad, doesn't it? Anyway, what a mess. The pawns on the c file look bad. The point is, before you take, you can hope that black's going to take on d4 and allow you to straighten them out. But once you take, you've got isolated pawns on the c file. But Ray Keene has a concept in mind. So he plays knight h2. So when he played h3, that makes space for the knight to go to h2. I mean, it also stopped the bishop moving to g4 and pinning the knight, but it created a square for the knight to use. Now, you might ask yourself, why on earth is he playing knight h2? All will become revealed. What I would say is, in this closed... It's on the way to d5. In these... It got revealed really quickly. In these closed positions, people have time to manoeuvre. So this is a complex strategic position, but it's pretty closed. So there's time for kind of deep manoeuvring plans. b6 from black. So here we go, knight f1, and it's on the way to d5. Here's this thematic bishop a6 move, attacking the c pawn. Knight e3 defends the c pawn, but also thinking about going to d5. Black castles long. Now, this isn't wrong, but my reflection would be that normally in the Nimzo, black is castling on the king side, trying to keep the king safe and hoping to win probably the weak c4 pawn, perhaps the c3 pawn. Basically, you know, looking to win weak pawns or perhaps win an endgame and get to the endgame in one piece. Castling queenside is pretty cool. The only problem is that's really where the battle is going to be. That's where black wants to play actively, where the sort of fireworks are going to be. And so to put one's king there can create trouble. And when white plays knight d5, you just kind of think, wow, that knight's really close to black's king. Now, black could take that, but that allows white to straighten his pawns out, protected pass pawn, probably with a one-pawn endgame. So that changes the game completely. That makes it a game in which white's looking forward to the endgame rather than black looking forward to the endgame. So black moves the queen. White's castled on the king's side. So we've got opposite side castling here, which certainly points to a keen strategic struggle. It should point to kind of every tempo counts, mutual attacks, but actually, because the position's quite close, it's more of a manoeuvring game. Knight e8 from black coming to the really nice d6 square with that knight. Get the rook on an open file. You don't want your Ferrari in the garage, you want it on the open road. That's where rooks belong, on open files, or semi-open files. Queen e6 just gives the queen a few more options. f4 is a great move. So with f4, the concept is that if black takes that, white can take back with the bishop, and that bishop's looking right into black's castle position. I mean, you're normally taught not to move pawns in front of your king. Sometimes you can move your f-pawn. But in this position, it's really good. So actually, black just goes ahead and defends that e-pawn, and then white can push and lock the position. So again, by advancing the pawn, white has managed to close the king side, which is really good. Queen has to move because it's attacked, developing the bishop to a square where it's doing something and it can't be taken by a black pawn, because a lot of those squares are covered by black pawns now. And here we have again knight a5, so this thematic development. So the c4 pawn can't be taken at the moment, but now white's having to defend it with the queen. And I mean, white has a beautiful knight on d5, but clearly the d3 bishop is tied down to defensive duties, basically behaving like a big pawn behind its other pawns. Rook b2, perhaps thinking about doubling on the b file. Black's manoeuvring with the rooks, and again white does double. Black brings the rook across for defence. Now this move, pawn a4, this is hard to understand, but actually white is shaping up for an exchange sacrifice here. So this only makes sense when you realise that white's trying to pull off an exchange sacrifice. In fact, white will pull off 2 exchange sacrifices in this game, which is fantastic. Rook f8. For those less experienced, an exchange sacrifice is when a player gives up a rook for a minor piece, either for a bishop or a knight. Rook's worth 5 pawns, knight or a bishop's worth 3 pawns, so it's basically like a 2-pawn deficit. Bishop g1, rook d7, bishop e3. There's a bit of cat and mouse here, a bit of manoeuvring. You often see this in Grandmaster games where there's a sort of manoeuvring phase of the game. Rook d8. Now, white has undoubled the rooks, and again, rook a2 seems mysterious, because where's that rook going from a2? Well, we will find out. A deep plan has been conceived. Queen d7, just keeping an eye on the a4 pawn, really tying the rook down to its defence, getting the king to a slightly safer square. d6 is a nice square for the knight, isn't it? You know, central, knight can't be budged from it. Again, it's attacking the c pawn for a 3rd time, so that pawn is now dropping. So if I were black now, I'd be excited, thinking, wow, am I winning a pawn here? Am I winning this game? And this is the kind of shocking move, rook b5. So this offers the rook as an exchange sacrifice. Actually, not dissimilar from what Ray did against Danny King as black, where he offered a rook that could be taken by a bishop. And it's voluntary for black. I mean, black doesn't have to take it. In fact, the engines think that's the best move, but it's not forced. But black does go ahead and take it. You can't take with the knight, because then when white takes back, actually with either pawn, the bishop's trapped on a6. So white takes back ab. So now white's an exchange down, a whole exchange down. But the pawn's been saved. King starts to move across, and what white's going to do is go ahead and double on the a file while still protecting that weak c pawn. And again, it's a close position. The reason white can get away with sacrificing an exchange, in fact 2 exchanges in this position, is because the position is so close. So there are no open files. So the rooks haven't really got any scope for action. They're kind of, you know, they're blocked by pawns and things. Whereas the knight, you know, the knight on d5 is worth more than either of the black rooks, actually. It's a fantastic piece. So, but it's risky for white, right? Because if white doesn't create some threats quickly and the position opens up into an endgame, the rooks will be much, much more powerful on an open board. Queen f7. So again, white's sacrificing a 2nd exchange here. But now there are some concrete threats around the black king. I mean, the pawn on c5 looks pretty vulnerable, for instance. Can't be taken yet, but it looks vulnerable. Queen f8. I think Ray said that g6 was necessary, basically just creating some counterplay, opening some lines, creating some play on the king's side. Queen f8, queen a6, attacking that knight. The knight was defended, but the knight moves back, and now the white queen is eyeing up the c5 pawn. This is fascinating. Now the white bishop comes to, the light squared white bishop comes to life, because when the knight was on d6, the bishop was tied down to the defence of these 2 weak pawns on e4 and c4, but now the knight's gone, the light squared bishop's free, and black has a weak complex on the light squares. So black's light squares are very weak, which results from black losing the light squared bishop. So in this stage of the game, black really misses the light squared bishop. Here comes the white light square bishop moving around. And so here, basically, black's going to lose the pawn on c5, because white's threatening to take the knight on e8, deflecting the rook, and that would then allow white to take on c5. So black finds a way to create some complications here. Looks like he's threatening to exchange off that knight on d5 that's been amazing all through the game. But actually, there's a complex sequence here. So white can take here, but then black takes here. So white's attacking the black queen, but black is attacking the white queen. If white takes, then black takes, but then white can come back here, picking up an extra piece. So white has sacrificed 2 exchanges, but now has won back a piece. So if we just do a very quick tally of what's going on. So rooks are worth 5 pawns, say. So we got 10 pawns with the rooks, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 pawns for black. White will say that a minor piece is worth 3.5. So the 3 minor pieces are going to be worth 10.5. Then we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. So actually now white is material up, although it's complicated because black takes a pawn off straight away. And it's just a complicated position. It's very unclear because the material is so mixed. I think in the analysis, Ray's opponent wanted to play, thought A5 was a better move here. So Ligterink thought that A5 was a better move rather than taking this off. We'll see this allows some complications from white. Getting the bishop on a nice square where it's defended. Now this move, this creates problems. So the engine understands why black's doing it. You can see why black's doing it. But the issue is, after this, bishop f3 is an absolute beauty. So everything of value to black is on that long diagonal. Both rooks and the king are all on that long diagonal. And the bishop is looking right down. So this is the moment when black really misses that light square bishop. Black's also in time trouble, so moves the rook away because it was attacked, and now white's able to move the knight, attacking both rooks at once. So attacking the rook on c4 and the rook on b7 at once. And actually in time trouble this is not quite accurate, so e4 is not quite accurate. Better would have been rook c to c7. You can't move the b rook actually to c7 because it's pinned. So rook to c7 would have been a better move, just defending that rook, because this actually loses a pawn as well. White can take there. Black does take the bishop, but then white plays a really good move here, pawn g4. And the idea here is that white can capture this isolated pawn, this pawn that's strayed into enemy territory. White can capture it in a way that doesn't spoil the white pawn structure. So the rook comes around, and then the white king is coming to pick up the pawn, comes in front to stop it running, and then the knight goes in the way and shields off the rook, so stops the rook defending, which is really clever. White takes, pushing the king away. Check here. The bishop just backs off, and at this point black resigns. The plan for white's got loads of options, but if the knight comes to e6 and then the bishop comes to f8, it looks like that g7 pawn is dropping. I mean, you've got to do it in such a way as not to let the a pawn run, but the bishop is still covering the a pawn from f8. But basically, black's pawns on the king side are frozen on dark squares. White's got a dark square bishop. White is up material quite substantially, say it's 2 pawns up on the kind of material count. And black resigns. So this is a wonderful game. I mean, it's an interesting idea to try as white in the Nimzo. And it's really brave to sacrifice 2 exchanges in a position like that. I mean, exchange sacrifices often backfire. But actually, having gone through 3 of Ray's games now, I've seen 3 positional exchange sacrifices, which is fascinating. So I think Petrosian was also a master of positional exchange sacrifices. But that's an interesting thing to learn about. Nigel from my club carried out a positional exchange sacrifice against me in a correspondence game, Sicilian Nadorf. And I should do that game sometime because it was a really good game. He played really well. He won it. He won in the end game, and it still hurts. And but also I'm happy for him. But it's a lovely tactic when you can make it work, particularly if you get a pawn for it. It can be tricky to face actually in end games. Anyway, I really hope you've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed looking at it. Thank you to Ray and Gert for creating a beautiful game that we're looking at all these years later. 40 years later, we're looking at it. They would never have guessed that this would go on YouTube, would they, at the time? It's a funny old world. And I hope you're all well, and see you soon.